Warhammer 40,000. We've got a lot to cover, and I want this video to be short, so I'm going to be brief. If you're already a fan of 40k, this video is not for you. If, however, you know absolutely nothing about the world and want a quick overview of the factions, or maybe you have a friend you want to get into the game, then you've come to the right place. Definitely read the episode description for some more detailed notes, and check the timestamps if you want to learn about a specific army, but otherwise, let's get right into it. Now, before I talk about armies, I just want to briefly mention the warp first, because it's one of the most important aspects of the Warhammer universe. Basically, alongside our dimension, which is made of physical matter, the warp is a parallel dimension composed of purely psychic energy. For now, you really only need to know 3 things about the warp. 1. Spaceships can enter it like a wormhole for FTL travel throughout space. 2. Demons live there. I'll explain that one more later. And 3. It's basically the source of all psychic powers, aka magic. Keeping those things in mind, let's move on to the races that live and, well, mostly fight throughout the galaxy. Humans. Warhammer takes place in the future, the year 40,000 in fact. In that time, humanity has crossed the stars and founded an empire known as the Imperium of Mankind. In the real world, this is the largest and most varied faction in 40k, with the widest range of miniatures for armies and sub-factions that all fall under the banner of the Imperium. Given that they are human, they're arguably the least evil faction in 40k, but that's not saying much. There's a reason the phrase grimdark comes from Warhammer. Humans in the 41st millennium are basically xenophobic fascists. Culture has stagnated, technological progress is forbidden, and they worship an immortal corpse god known as the Emperor. You're more likely to die from being labeled a traitor or a heretic than actually fighting an enemy alien, but if you're stuck in the 41st millennium, it's not like any other faction is much better. Space Marines. Space Marines are human super soldiers, genetically engineered for war. In the real world, these are the poster children for 40k. Space Marines are divided into groups called chapters, with countless chapters throughout the galaxy. Each chapter has their own armor colors, themes, and even tactics. We've got Roman boys, brooding vampire boys, Viking and werewolf boys, Pyromaniac boys, ghost boys, silver boys, gold boys.
Big boys, itty bitty boys, Mississippi boys, inner city boys.
The sky is the limit. Imperial Guard. Not every soldier can be super. The Imperial Guard are the rank and file that make up the bulk of the Imperium's armed forces. They don't have the best weapons or equipment, so most of their success comes from both sheer numbers and their commander's willingness to throw their men into the proverbial meat grinder to secure victory no matter the cost. Guardsmen can be as varied as Space Marines, but some highlights include Cadians, Catachans, and Death Corps of Krieg. Sisters of Battle. Halfway between the Imperial Guard and Space Marines are the Sisters of Battle. Normal humans in power armor, Sisters are the soldiers of the Ecclesiarchy, which is basically the church side of the Imperium. So, yeah, they're nuns in space. But like, cool, kick-ass nuns. Adeptus Mechanicus. They're technically part of the Imperium, but also pretty much independent. They control all of the factory planets known as Forge Worlds, including Mars, and are responsible for making all the weapons and ships and technology that the Imperium uses. Oh, and they worship a machine god called the Omnissiah and think all machines are divine creations that have spirits inside of them. These are just the largest forces of the Imperium, but many other smaller groups and factions exist. Some examples include knights, inquisitors, assassins, rogue traders, and hive gangs. Chaos. Okay, time for another brief aside. Remember what I said about the warp being made of psychic energy? Well, all the emotions and desires of all the sentient beings in the galaxy manifest in the warp. Also, demons live in the warp, so space travel can get pretty dangerous. And over time, the strongest emotions coalesced into self-aware beings. These beings became known as the 4 Chaos Gods, and they are worshipped throughout the galaxy by the forces of evil. We've got Khorne. Khorne represents strength, bloodshed, and war. To give you an idea, his followers are fond of saying, "Blood for the Blood God, and skulls for the Skull Throne." Tzeentch. Tzeentch is the god of change, deceit, and overly intricate plans. He loves sorcery and magic and running the long con. Tzeentch is the kind of guy where no matter what happens, win or lose, he'll say it was all part of the plan and then just run away cackling. Nurgle. Nurgle is the embodiment of disease, decay, pestilence, and rot. Followers of Nurgle think he's a pretty cool guy because if you think about it, death just makes way for more life. What's so bad about that? But then again, most of his followers do have various bodily fluids leaking out of various discolored orifices. Slaanesh. Slaanesh is the youngest Chaos God, but we'll get to that shortly. They represent pain, pleasure, hedonism, and decadence. Very Hellraiser.
We have such sights to show you.
They're basically the embodiment of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So, who are the biggest fans of the Chaos Gods? The Chaos Marines. When they were first created by the Emperor, Space Marines were pretty awesome and nearly unstoppable. Unfortunately, fully half of them turned evil and fell to the worship of chaos. Whoops. Many legions worship specific gods, like the World Eaters, Death Guard, Thousand Sons, and the Emperor's Children, but many also just worship chaos as a whole. If you like Space Marines but wish they were spikier and eviler, chaos is for you. Though to be fair, also not all traders worship chaos. Some are just sort of generically unaffiliated evil, some are space pirates, but they're all bad news. Demons. Often accompanying Chaos Marines, but just as likely to appear on their own, are the Chaos Demons. Demons come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, but they're all dangerous, and they pretty much all take after one of the Chaos Gods, because each demon is in fact a small fraction of the god that created them. Eldar. Let's not beat around the bush. They're elves. Early 40k was all about taking fantasy tropes and putting them in space. They're elves in space. They were the strongest civilization in the galaxy, and then they partied so hard they birthed a chaos god. Now that their empire is gone, the survivors travel across the galaxy on vast world ships. They build vehicles and weapons out of a special psychic material called Wraithbone, and instead of traveling through the warp, they use a network of teleporters known as the Webway, which is sort of like their own private, personal pan-pocket dimension. Dark Eldar. You know what I said about the Eldar partying too hard? These guys are the ones who kept on partying. They're like the edgy goth kids at school who got really into body mods. However, unlike most goth kids, the Dark Eldar take slaves, torture people, and murder for fun. They're just all around evil. Harlequins. Clowns. They're elves in space, but also clowns in space. Or jesters, if we're being generous. To be slightly more accurate, this is a smaller subfaction of the Eldar. They're essentially a theater troupe that travels through space, but also kills people. And you never know whose side they'll be on.
Wild card, bitches! Yeah!
Orks. Not only are they orcs in space, they're football hooligans in space. For fellow Americans who might not be familiar with football hooligans, picture something like a wild frat party. They may seem primitive, but they like fighting, and they're good at it. The biggest and strongest orcs become leaders on the basis of being the biggest and strongest orcs. They make really janky vehicles and weapons, they have weird beliefs, and they all talk like this. If you want to have fun and get silly with your army, orcs are easily your best bet. Also, and fun fact, they reproduce via spores and are technically a fungus. Necrons. Necrons are if mummies were also the Terminator. They're an ancient civilization with pyramids, scarabs, vaguely Egyptian-sounding names, and they are soulless, remorseless killing machines. They also use shards of dead gods as weapons, which is just metal as hell. The Necron dynasty as a whole has been in stasis for millions of years, and waking up one of their tomb worlds is always a bad idea. Tyranids. Did you ever play Hungry Hungry Hippos?
Hungry, hungry hippos! First to gobble up the most marbles wins!
We're hungry, hungry hippos! We're in an eating race!
Yeah, that's the Tyranids. A vast, galaxy-spanning hive mind controls these hungry, hungry bugs. All they do is consume biomass and chew bubblegum. And they're all out of bubblegum. They can learn and evolve based on fighting and absorbing different species, and they make extensive use of living weapons. They're essentially a mix of xenomorphs and the bugs from Starship Troopers. Genestealer Cults. Genestealers are a type of advanced Tyranid scout who have a singular purpose. They infiltrate populated planets, interbreed with the inhabitants, and create Tyranid hybrids. These hybrids go on to multiply, and each successive generation looks more and more human. As they blend in with the locals, they form secret cults of Tyranid worshippers and get themselves into positions of power to weaken or defeat their enemies from within before the actual Tyranid invasion even arrives. And then they get eaten like everyone else. But like, they're cool with it. Tau. You like Gundam? Good news. This is the faction for anime and mecha fans. The Tau are sort of space communists who fight for a greater good. The greater good. They have a rigid caste system in which different castes perform different societal roles. If you're familiar with Halo, they're kind of like the Covenant because they accept other alien races into their empire, including the Kroot, Vespids, and even the occasional human colony. They might not be physically strong, but they've got big guns. They're also probably the actual closest thing 40k has to good guys, but that also depends on the writer. Leagues of Votann. In the early days of 40k, there was another race known as the Squats. They were an offshoot of humanity that lived on dense mining planets with high gravity, which made them short and stout. Once again, they were dwarves in space. And also bikers? Most people thought they were extremely silly, so in our world they disappeared without a trace for roughly 25 years. But now? They're back, baby. In their new incarnation, they're still an offshoot of mankind, but they do their own thing and aren't part of the Imperium. And unlike the Imperium, they're not afraid of new technology or AI. I hope you enjoyed this brief overview, but really, I just skimmed the surface of a deep ocean of lore. If anything in particular caught your interest, I highly encourage you to go off and learn more on your own. There are more than enough books and games and wiki articles to fall into a rabbit hole for each and every one of the factions. But if you want to know how the galaxy ended up this way, there will be an upcoming companion video in which I cover a very brief history of the Warhammer universe. Hopefully you stick around until then, and I'll see you next time.